While others were out partying, he was sleeping on a cot in the back room, dreaming of a future with the woman he had reshaped his life for. She used to say she was proud of him. She smiled, kissed his cheek, called him a hero. And then, she became a stranger in her own home. Evening dresses, for the girls, secret phone calls, bills from spas he'd never heard of. He wanted to believe he was wrong, until the moment he heard her voice, soft, unfamiliar, laced with fake babies. In one hand, a bag of takeout. In the other, a reality falling apart. Hello, my friend. I'm so glad you stopped by my channel. If you're here for the first time, don't forget to subscribe and share this video with your friends or family. It really helps my channel a lot. Please tell me in which city or country you watch this video. I value every one of your comments. So, let's get started. My name is Darren Callahan. At 44 years old, I can say with conviction that I built something I was genuinely proud of. A network of 7 pizzerias spread across 3 counties. It all started when I was 25, working grueling 18-hour days and sleeping on a makeshift cot in the back of my first location. Rachel used to joke that I had more affection for those pizza ovens than for her. Looking back, maybe she wasn't entirely wrong. We crossed paths 17 years ago in a business class at a local community college. She was focused on marketing, while I was brushing up on basic accounting principles. Rachel had a presence that turned heads the moment she walked into a room. Vivid auburn hair that captured every beam of light and green eyes that hinted at stories untold. She was 24 then, driven and full of ambition, constantly talking about launching her own advertising firm someday. I was smitten almost immediately. Those early days were some of the happiest I can remember. We worked together, shoulder to shoulder. She took charge of the marketing efforts for my growing pizza business, while I managed the day-to-day operations and logistics. She had a natural talent for branding. She even coined the slogan, Callahan's Corner, which still resonates with customers. After 3 years of dating, we tied the knot. It felt like a true partnership in every way. We were building something lasting, side by side. But success has a strange way of revealing who people really are. It doesn't always change you. It unmasks you. Around the 10-year mark in our marriage, when the business began flourishing, Rachel started to pull back. She said she wanted to take a step back from work, maybe start thinking about having children. I didn't question it for a second. We were financially stable by then, and I believed she'd earned some rest after all her contributions. She transitioned into a more relaxed lifestyle, signing up for exclusive social clubs, experimenting with pottery, and spending more time shopping with her friends. Meanwhile, I was still grinding, opening new locations, managing staff, negotiating with suppliers. The restaurant business is unrelenting. Razor-thin margins, constant turnover, never-ending pressure. I was often out before dawn and back home long after sunset, especially during the busy seasons. Rachel always seemed to admire my work ethic. "You're securing our future," she'd whisper before kissing me goodnight as I collapsed into bed. I'm so fortunate to have a husband who's so devoted. But with hindsight, those compliments feel rehearsed, like lines in a play I didn't know I was part of. Things began to change about 2 years ago. Rachel became more focused on her appearance. More hours at the gym, shopping for trendy clothes, upgrading from monthly to weekly manicures. She said it was about boosting her self-esteem. I didn't question it. I even hired her a personal trainer, thinking I was being a supportive husband. You know the saying, happy wife, happy life. Then came the phone calls she insisted on taking in private. The sudden increase in girls' nights out. New passwords on her phone and computer. Whenever I expressed concern, she accused me of being controlling or suspicious. So I backed off. I gave her space. We had built a life together. Why would I assume anything was wrong? Trust. It's such a fragile thing. Like a perfectly risen ball of dough. Leave it unattended, and it collapses. The moment everything unraveled came on a Tuesday evening in March. I remember it vividly. Tuesdays were always reserved for inventory at our downtown store. No one knew my schedule better than Rachel. After 17 years together, that kind of knowledge becomes second nature. That day, I wrapped things up ahead of time and thought I'd surprise her with food from her favorite Thai spot on 5th Street, the one known for slow service but the best spring rolls. I imagined us eating together, maybe finally reconnecting after what felt like a growing distance. When I pulled into our driveway, I noticed her car was gone. Not exactly unusual. She'd been spending a lot of time out with friends lately. Still, something felt off. Call it instinct. After all those years, you start to notice the rhythm of someone's life, and when it shifts. As I neared the front door, I caught the sound of voices from inside. At first, I assumed the TV had been left on, but as I got closer, I recognized Rachel's voice, low, tender, in a tone I hadn't heard from her in ages. "I know, baby, but he always works late on Tuesdays," she murmured. "We've got at least 2 hours." I stopped cold, my hand hovering just above the doorknob. Baby? That wasn't a name she'd ever used for me. She'd called me honey, sometimes sweetheart, but never baby. Then I heard a man respond, "You worry too much. That's what makes this exciting." And then Rachel's laugh, giddy, teenage, unfamiliar. I stood there on the porch, gripping a bag of now lukewarm Thai food, listening to my wife flirt with another man inside the home I had worked my entire life to provide, the house I thought we'd retire in together. Instead of bursting in like some cliched husband scorned, I chose a different path, one that, in hindsight, may have been the only thing keeping me sane. I backed away in silence, returned to my truck, and slid into the driver's seat with trembling fingers. My hands shook so badly it took me several tries to get the engine to turn over. For the next 3 hours, I aimlessly cruised around town, through quiet streets and winding back roads, my thoughts unraveling. A part of me desperately wanted to believe I had misunderstood, that there was some harmless context to what I'd heard. But the part of me that had built a 7-location pizza chain from scratch, the part that dealt in logic and hard truth, knew better. When I walked in at my usual hour that evening, Rachel was in the kitchen, humming softly as she loaded the dishwasher. She looked relaxed, serene even. She leaned in to kiss my cheek like it was just another ordinary night. "How was inventory?" she asked. "Same as always," I answered, keeping my tone even. She smiled and returned to tidying the kitchen. That's when the details hit me, subtle, but jarring. She was wearing different clothes than she had that morning. And the perfume? A new scent I didn't recognize. Tiny observations, but in that moment, they screamed louder than words. That night, lying beside her in bed, I made a quiet decision. I wasn't going to shout, accuse, or confront her, not yet. I needed proof. In business, you don't act on emotion, you gather information. And this was shaping up to be one of the most pivotal choices I'd ever face. The following morning, I broke a routine I hadn't touched in nearly 20 years of marriage. I logged into our online banking. What I saw turned my stomach. Over the past half year, Rachel had been withdrawing cash regularly, $200 here, $300 there. Always from ATMs far from our neighborhood or my stores. The pattern seemed random, but the total was not. More than $8,000 had vanished. Then I reviewed the credit card charges, upscale restaurants I'd never been to, a luxury hotel spa, lingerie purchases from boutique stores I'd never heard of. Definitely not your average department store fare. All of it charged to accounts we both shared, and all while I was grinding day and night to keep our business strong. "Rachel?" I called out from my office. "Can you come in here for a second?" She appeared in the doorway wearing a tank top and yoga pants, clearly dressed for her morning workout. "What's going on?" she asked, casual on the surface. But I caught the edge of hesitation in her tone. "Just had a question about a few charges," I said, rotating the laptop so she could see. "Like this $400 spa visit. When exactly did that happen?" Her expression shifted, confusion, then calculation, before settling into the practiced, polished smile she always wore when lying. "Oh, that? Remember that girls' weekend? Sarah's card didn't go through, so I paid for the spa. She gave me the cash afterward." A convincing response. If I hadn't already been suspicious, I might have believed it. "And these restaurant charges?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "Lunch meetings," she replied smoothly. "I've been exploring a return to marketing, meeting potential clients, just easing back in." I nodded slowly, hiding my reaction. "That's great, babe. Really proud of you." The relief that washed over her face was almost comical. She truly thought I'd bought it. As soon as she left for the gym, I picked up the phone and called Brent Mercer, my longtime accountant and someone I trusted implicitly. He had connections in every financial corner of the county. "Brent, I need you to do something for me," I said when he picked up. "I want you to track all of Rachel's financial activity, every account, every transfer, everything." He paused. "That's a big ask, Darren. Are you sure?" "Completely. And Brent, this stays between us." By that same afternoon, I had everything I needed. Rachel had secretly opened a separate checking account 3 months prior. She'd been depositing the withdrawn cash there, along with money from sources I couldn't identify. The total was already over $12,000, but what hit me hardest was the savings account, set up under her maiden name, with a balance north of $27,000. That was money that should have belonged to both of us, stashed away without my knowledge. Later that evening, I parked my truck just outside our house, gripping the printouts Brent had sent. Her car was in the driveway, but the house was mostly dark, except for the glow from our bedroom window. She was probably getting ready for another so-called girls' night. I took out my phone and dialed Travis Benton, an old high school friend who now owned a private investigation firm. "Travis, it's Darren Callahan. I've got something personal I need you to look into." 3 days later, Travis delivered a sealed manila envelope. Inside was everything: indisputable, unforgiving truth. Photos, call logs, bank records. The man's name was Kyle Whitaker, 38, recently divorced, employed as a regional sales manager for a medical supply company. He and Rachel had been seeing each other regularly, twice a week, for the last 4 months. And the spa package? Booked at the same boutique hotel where most of their meetings took place. What devastated me most wasn't just the infidelity. It was the trail of financial deceit she left behind. Rachel hadn't simply dipped into our shared funds to finance her betrayal. She had been discreetly funneling money away, quietly assembling what looked like an escape stash. I tracked the flow into concealed accounts, funds she'd gathered by selling jewelry I'd gifted her, cashing in the bonds we had invested in jointly, even pawning the watch my father had entrusted to me. She came through the door a little past 10 that night, softly humming an unfamiliar tune. She noticed me sitting at the kitchen table, a glass of whiskey in hand, with an open envelope resting beside me. "You're still up?" she said lightly, leaning down to kiss the top of my head like nothing at all was amiss. "Sit," I said quietly. Something in my tone must have given her pause. She halted mid-stride. "What is it?" she asked cautiously. Without answering, I slid the contents of the envelope across the table. One by one, I laid out the photos, Rachel having dinner with Kyle, the two of them entering a hotel lobby, locked in a kiss in the dim lighting of his office parking garage. The color drained from her face, returned in a rush, then vanished again. "I can explain," she started, but I lifted my hand to cut her off. "There's nothing you can explain," I said, voice steady and composed. "But I will. You've been quietly draining our finances to support your affair. You've looked me in the eye and lied while plotting your escape, all while emptying what we built together." Her legs gave out as she dropped into a chair, hands trembling. "It's not what it looks like." $27,000, Rachel," I said coldly, locking eyes with her. That's exactly what it looks like. You robbed our marriage to fund a fantasy with your lover. That's when she started to cry. But these weren't tears of sorrow. They were the panicked tears of someone who'd just been exposed. I never meant for things to unravel like this, she sobbed. It just happened. Kyle makes me feel alive again. And what about me? I asked quietly. What did I make you feel? Safe, she whispered. Secure, but not alive. I sat in silence, letting the weight of her words settle into place. Well, Rachel, I said quietly, you're about to experience a whole new kind of aliveness. Because starting tomorrow, you're going to face the consequences of your choices. I stood up, leaving the table and the damning evidence spread before her. Pack your bags, I said without looking back. You've got 24 hours to get out of my house. But she didn't leave. Instead, Rachel chose to escalate, and that's when things turned far more sinister. The next morning, I came down to find her acting like it was just another day. She stood at the stove making coffee, dressed immaculately. That red dress I'd given her for our anniversary clung to her frame. Her hair was flawless, full makeup applied with care. Good morning, sweetheart, she said sweetly. I made your favorite, Eggs Benedict. I eyed the plate. In nearly 2 decades, she'd cooked for me maybe a dozen times. Never that dish. We need to have a conversation, I said, pouring coffee into a mug. I couldn't agree more, she replied, her voice suddenly hardening. I've given last night's talk a lot of thought. She sat across from me, folding her hands neatly on the table like she was ready to broker a deal. Here's what's going to happen, Darren, she began crisply. I'm not leaving. This house belongs to me too, and I have rights. I took a slow sip and studied her expression. This wasn't the woman I married. This version of Rachel was cold, methodical, predatory. And another thing, she went on. You're having some sort of breakdown. Probably a midlife crisis, paranoia, burnout. It's all textbook. I'm genuinely worried about your mental state. I was speechless for a moment. Was she seriously questioning my sanity? I've spoken to a lawyer, she added, unlocking her phone. Did you know that if I can prove you're mentally unstable, I could request an involuntary psychiatric evaluation through the court? I gently set my cup down. Is that supposed to be a threat? No, Darren. That's just reality, she said smoothly. You're imagining things. You're twisting perfectly normal situations into elaborate plots. Kyle Whitaker. That night, Jonas stopped by. With his new girlfriend, just a guy from my book club. Those photos? Harmless. You've built some elaborate fantasy in your head. She was attempting to gaslight me, to make me question what I knew beyond any doubt. After all the years we'd been together, she genuinely thought she could rewrite the truth, make me believe I was delusional instead of taking responsibility for what she'd done. Rachel, I said with absolute calm, you're making a grave mistake. No, Darren, she shot back. That mistake is yours. While you were busy playing armchair detective, I was busy compiling a thorough record of your unpredictable behavior, the late nights out, the drinking binges, and the endless paranoid accusations. I have people ready to swear under oath that you've been mentally unstable for a while now. She rose gracefully from her chair, smoothing the front of her dress with practiced poise. Here's my suggestion, she began. We start therapy. You get help for what's clearly a psychological issue, and maybe I won't have you institutionalized. But I'm staying in this house, and you're going to put an end to this madness. I just stood there, staring at her, wearing the dress I had bought, eating food I'd paid for, while she threatened to have me locked away, all because I'd uncovered her infidelity. That's one hell of a proposition, I said, slowly rising to my feet. But I've got an alternative. I walked over to my briefcase, opened it, and pulled out a heavy binder. Inside was a collection of damning evidence Travis had put together, along with a few additional documents I'd tracked down over the weekend. After nearly 2 decades together, I said, spreading the contents across the table, my wife tells me she's going away with another man, and doesn't care what I think. I motioned toward the now cluttered surface, covered in undeniable proof. So I told her, great, because starting tomorrow, you're no longer my wife. The self-satisfied look on Rachel's face disintegrated as she absorbed what she was seeing. Account statements from banks she thought I didn't know about, hotel receipts, even message logs from our phone carrier. And what happened next? I continued, watching her freeze. She broke down crying, not because of guilt, but because she finally realized her husband wasn't the naive fool she believed he was. The fear in her expression washed away all traces of her previous arrogance, but I wasn't finished. You want to raise the stakes? I asked, pulling out one final sheet from the folder. Let's raise them. I placed a signed restraining order into her hands. You've got 2 hours to grab what you can and get out. If you're still here when the sheriff arrives, they'll arrest you for trespassing. Her hand shook as she tried to read through the document. You can't do this, she whispered. This is my house too. Actually, I replied calmly, I can, and I did. I checked everything. The deed's in my name alone. Has been since we closed. You never contributed a cent toward the mortgage. There's no legal documentation entitling you to anything. Watching realization creep across her face was deeply satisfying. She understood now. She had been completely outmaneuvered. The vehicles, titled to me, the credit cards, mine, even the jewelry you've been quietly selling off, still legally mine. Gifts count as marital property until divorce or death. She made one final desperate play. I'll ruin you. I'll tell everyone who you really are. I'll destroy your reputation. Just then, my phone rang. Caller ID, Jonas. Perfect timing. Hey, Jonas, I said, putting the call on speaker. Rachel's here too. Darren, I just got off the phone with Travis Benton. Jonas's voice boomed through the kitchen. He told me what's been going on. I'm heading over now. Jonas, a Marine with 2 tours in Afghanistan behind him, was built like a tank and had the tact to match. He'd never liked Rachel. Always said she loved my money more than she ever loved me. No need, I replied. The hell there isn't, Jonas snapped. Nobody messes with my brother. I'm bringing Tommy and Mike. Tommy and Mike, his old military buddies, worked security now and were not men you wanted to cross. Rachel's complexion drained of color. We'll be there in 20, Jonas finished. If she gives you any trouble, we'll handle it. I ended the call and looked at her. She was now frantically gathering up the photos and papers from the table. You've got a choice to make, I told her. You can pack your things and leave peacefully, or stick around and explain to 3 veterans why you thought robbing and blackmailing their friend was a good idea. She was already bolting toward the stairs. This isn't over, Darren, she spat. Oh, it absolutely is, I said, as she disappeared upstairs. 20 minutes later, Jonas's truck rolled into the driveway just as Rachel was wrestling her final suitcase into her car. One look at the 3 men stepping out of that truck, and whatever parting speech she had planned died in her throat. She didn't say a word, just drove off in silence. As her car disappeared down the street, Jonas handed me a cold beer. Good riddance, he muttered. For the first time in months, I could finally breathe. But the saga wasn't quite over. 3 days later, Rachel made her boldest move yet. She returned. And this time, she brought company. I was at the kitchen table reviewing some inventory reports when I heard multiple car doors slam outside. Looking through the window, I saw her climb out of a black SUV, and behind her was a face I recognized from old family photos. Her brother, Derek Mallory, 35, former Army, 2 tours in Iraq, now jobless, and, by Rachel's own past admissions, drinking too much and drifting from one dead end to the next. And from the way he carried himself, buzz cut, tattoos down both arms, a menacing swagger, he looked every bit the kind of problem I didn't need walking up my driveway. He stood before me in rugged boots and a sleeveless top, his arms thick with muscle and tension, as if confrontation was his default mode. I fired off a quick text to Jonas. Heads up. Backup needed. Then I stepped outside, hands clearly visible, though every nerve was bracing for a possible escalation. Derek, I said evenly. Been some time. Not nearly long enough, he shot back, advancing a few steps. My sister tells me you've lost it, throwing out wild accusations, making threats, acting completely deranged. Rachel lingered just behind him, expertly playing the part of the wronged woman. She even managed a few tears, just enough to sell the illusion. Derek, I said calmly. I've already shown her everything. Pictures, bank statements, the truth in full. She knows exactly what she's done. Proof of what? He snapped. Grabbing lunch with a friend? You're stalking her over having a life outside of you? That's when the realization hit. Rachel had completely re-engineered the narrative. In her version, I was the unstable, controlling husband who'd finally gone over the edge. Did she mention the $27,000 she withdrew without my knowledge? I asked. Derek's jaw tightened. You're seriously calling my sister a thief? I'm calling her exactly what she's proven herself to be, I replied. A liar, a cheater, a thief who got caught. Derek moved in close enough for me to smell the liquor on his breath. Careful how you talk, Callahan, he warned. Or what? I asked, refusing to flinch. His hand drifted toward his waist, and I spotted what looked suspiciously like the handle of a blade. But before things could escalate, Jonas's truck rumbled into the driveway. 3 doors swung open, and out stepped Jonas, Tommy, and Mike, each one a former Marine, moving like a unit, eyes scanning for threats. Derek took one look at them, and the bravado began to drain from his face. Is there a situation here? Jonas asked, voice firm, clipped, unmistakably military. Derek glanced between the 3 of them and seemed to reassess his odds. Just having a word with my brother-in-law, he muttered. Conversation's over, Tommy said flatly. He was the biggest of the trio, built like a linebacker, and with even less patience. Sensing her advantage slipping, Rachel tried one last play. They're threatening me. Someone call the cops. Excellent suggestion, Mike replied, already pulling out his phone. We can explain your little financial misdeeds while we're at it. Derek's brows knit together. Financial misdeeds? I held up my phone, displaying a list of banking transactions. She funneled close to 30 grand out of our joint accounts to bankroll her affair. It's all right here, every dollar tracked. For the first time, Derek looked rattled. He turned to Rachel, but she wouldn't meet his eyes. Rachel? He asked softly. Is this true? And with that, her act unraveled completely. It's complicated, Rachel muttered. He's twisting the facts. Just give me a straight answer, Derek said firmly. Did you take the money? The silence stretched thin and tense, until Rachel finally whispered, yes. Derek recoiled like she'd struck him. Christ, Rachel, what the hell were you thinking? In that moment, the dynamic shifted. Derek had come ready to go to war on her behalf. Now betrayal and disbelief flooded his voice as he realized he'd been duped. You dragged me out here thinking this guy was some monster, he said, voice trembling. And it turns out you're the one lying, stealing, and playing games. Rachel tried to spin the moment back in her favor. Derek, you don't understand. Darren's been emotionally absent for a long time. I felt invisible. So you fix that by stealing $30,000? Derek roared. Are you out of your damn mind? Jonas, Tommy, and Mike subtly stepped back, sensing that this was now a family reckoning, and Derek was handling it far better than I ever expected. I needed to feel something again, Rachel said, reaching for a sliver of empathy. Kyle made me feel alive, like Darren never could. Derek stared at her like he didn't even recognize her anymore. Rachel, I've been unemployed for 8 months. Do you have any idea what I could have done with that kind of money? The bills I could have paid? The job interviews I missed because I couldn't afford gas? Her guilt was written across her face. She'd been living lavishly on stolen funds while her own brother struggled to survive. "I'll pay it back," she mumbled. "With what?" Derek asked, voice laced with bitterness. "You gonna repay it with the same stolen money you used to fund your fantasy life? That cash your boyfriend's probably blowing on some other woman?" The words landed like a blow. Rachel's face fell. The truth in Derek's voice was undeniable, and she knew it. "I've made my share of mistakes, Derek," she said quietly. "But I'm still your sister." He held her gaze for several seconds, then turned his eyes to me before settling back on her. "No, Rachel," he said, with a grim finality. "My sister wouldn't have taken money from her husband. She wouldn't have stared me down and lied. And she damn sure wouldn't have dragged me out here ready to throw punches at a man who didn't deserve it." He turned to me and extended a hand. "Callahan, I owe you an apology," he said sincerely. "I came out here prepared to fight based on nothing but her lies." I took his hand without hesitation. "You were standing up for someone you cared about," I said. "That takes courage." "Someone I used to care about," he corrected coldly, shooting Rachel a hard look. "She's not the same person I grew up with." Rachel began crying again, but this time the emotion was real. Losing Derek's loyalty cracked something deep inside her. "What do I do now?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "I've got nowhere left." "You should have thought about that before you started stealing," Derek replied with icy detachment. Then he turned and walked toward his SUV, leaving her motionless on the driveway. "Figure it out on your own, Rachel. I'm done cleaning up after you." As his taillights disappeared down the road, Rachel looked back at me, her expression desperate. "Darren, please. Isn't there a way to make this right?" My voice was low and calm. "You chose your path. Now live with what comes next." She stood there another moment, before pulling out her phone to order a ride. When the Uber arrived and she climbed in, I realized I felt nothing for her anymore. No anger, no heartbreak, no nostalgia, just a deep, final sense of closure. Jonas handed me another beer. "You think that's the last time she shows up?" "With Rachel? Unlikely," I said. "But with Derek gone, she's got no backup. Whatever stunt she pulls next, she's doing it solo." "Good," Tommy said. "Much easier to deal with one loose cannon than one who brings her brother to the fight." Hard to argue with that. Half a year after Rachel vanished from my life, I got a call that brought everything full circle. "Mr. Callahan, this is Detective Lisa Martinez with the county sheriff's office," the voice said. "We've just taken your ex-wife into custody. Charges include fraud." As it turned out, Rachel had moved to Phoenix and started swindling divorced men on dating apps, spinning fake emergencies, making emotional pleas, and conning them out of money. She'd pocketed over 15 grand before authorities caught up with her. "We also found your business card in her apartment," Martinez added, "plus some notes, detailed ones, about your restaurants and financials. Looks like she was planning to target your customer base next." I provided testimony remotely during the trial. Seeing her on screen in a prison jumpsuit, attempting to defend her actions in front of a judge, felt like the final chapter. It was the end of a long, bitter episode. She was sentenced to 2 years behind bars and ordered to repay what she'd stolen from her victims. Not long after, Derek gave me a call. We'd stayed loosely in touch since that confrontation in my driveway. "Darren, I just wanted to thank you again," he said, "and apologize for how I came at you that day." "You were standing up for someone you thought you could trust," I told him. "I understand." "She's not part of my life anymore," he said firmly. "Not after what she did to you. Not after what she pulled on those men. That's not the sister I used to know." Derek had made real progress since then. Steady work with a construction crew and regular meetings with his AA group. He was finally getting his life on track. Sometimes healing starts in the ashes. As for me, things were thriving. With Rachel gone, I had mental clarity and emotional peace. Business was booming. I'd just opened my 8th pizzeria and was already scouting locations in neighboring states. That night, Jonas stopped by the main restaurant with his new girlfriend, Laura. She was a nurse, grounded, kind, the type of woman who reminded you that real love doesn't come with manipulation attached. "You seem lighter," she said over dinner, "like a man who's finally relaxed." "Freedom will do that," I told her. Jonas lifted his beer. "To cutting out the poison and holding tight to what's real." I clinked my bottle against his, thinking of the distance I'd traveled since Rachel left. I was sleeping better, thinking clearer, and surrounding myself with the people who genuinely mattered. Sometimes, losing the wrong person is exactly what clears the way forward. As for Kyle Whitaker, Rachel's old flame, word had it, he packed up and moved to California after her arrest. Smart move. He'd seen up close what happens when you tangle with the Callahan. The money she stole? Not all of it was ever recovered. But in the grand scheme, losing $27,000 was a small price for reclaiming my sanity. And at long last, I had my life back. The night I locked the restaurant doors, an unfamiliar but welcome feeling washed over me. Peace. The real kind. For once, I wasn't preoccupied with tracking my wife's location. I wasn't poring over spreadsheets, hunting for hidden transactions. And I didn't have to lie in bed beside someone who saw me more as a paycheck than a partner. There was no chaos, no suspicion, just a quiet stillness I hadn't known in years. 2 years later, I was in the kitchen of my 9th restaurant, guiding a new manager through the daily routines, when a woman walked in who would unknowingly redirect the trajectory of my life. Her name was Michelle Torres. She was 38, recently out of a marriage, and on the lookout for a fresh start. She had over a decade of experience in the restaurant business, and the easy, unguarded way she smiled told me more than words could. "I heard there might be a management position open," she said, offering her resume. After everything that had happened with Rachel, I'd grown cautious, especially when it came to putting faith in anyone new, let alone a woman. But there was something genuine about Michelle, an openness in her eyes that reminded me of what honesty used to feel like. I gestured toward a nearby table. "Why don't you tell me about your last job?" I asked. She explained how her marriage to a chef had collapsed after he cheated on her with one of the waitresses. Instead of retaliating or falling apart, she'd packed up her dignity and moved on, determined to rebuild her life from the ground up. "You can't change what someone else chooses to do," she said quietly. "You can only decide how you respond." I hired her that same day. Working with Michelle reignited something in me that had been dormant for a long time. She brought a fresh energy to the team, brimming with ideas, treating every customer like family, and inspiring the staff to work as equals. Within half a year, her location led the entire company in customer satisfaction. Over time, our professional collaboration began to evolve. Late-night shifts turned into dinners, which turned into long talks about business and the scars our past marriages had left behind. Michelle had 2 kids from her previous relationship, a 10-year-old daughter and a 12-year-old son who, in some ways, reminded me of myself at their age. One evening, while we were reviewing quarterly reports, she looked up and said, "For someone who went through hell, you seem surprisingly whole." I smiled. Therapy helped. So did the right people. And I finally figured out that hanging on to bitterness is like drinking poison and expecting someone else to die. She laughed. "That sounds like a Buddha quote." "Could be," I said. "Or maybe it's just one of Jonas's latest self-help books." 6 months later, right there in the same restaurant where we'd first met, I proposed to Michelle. Not because I needed someone to fill the space Rachel left, but because I'd finally found a woman who was worthy of building something real with. We kept the ceremony small, just the people who mattered. With Michelle's father no longer alive, Derek walked her down the aisle. Jonas stood next to me as my best man. As expected, a letter arrived from Rachel in prison, brimming with repentance, biblical references, and an appeal for forgiveness. I read it once, briefly, then dropped it into the trash. Some chapters don't need a final sentence. 3 years had passed since I closed the door on my life with Rachel, and I had found a sense of fulfillment deeper than I'd ever thought possible. The business was flourishing, the people I loved were thriving, and my marriage was built on respect, love, and partnership, not desperation or money. In the end, real revenge doesn't come from retaliation, it comes from happiness. And sometimes, what feels like the worst loss turns out to be the only way to create space for what you were meant to have all along. This story has come to an end. What's your opinion? Share it in the comments, my friend. And if you like this story, check out other exciting videos on my channel. I'll say goodbye until the next video. See you.